All right, so we're back here with Harvey at the Boostcreep dyno shop. We're here today to talk about crankcase pressure. Now, a long time ago, kind of where this all started was when I was playing around with catch cans and Air Oil Separators on my car, and I had some issues, primarily at the track. I was trying to figure out what was going on, and so I realized that one piece of data that would really be helpful for me to try and figure out what was happening was to see if I was actually building up positive crankcase pressure, and if so, how much. And so I was trying to think of a way, well, how can I measure that? And what I realized is, well, the oil cap basically sits right on a valve cover. The valve covers are pretty much plumbed right into the crankcase pressure. And so what I did is I put basically just a barbed fitting on an oil cap. Subaru oil caps are plastic, and ran that to a boost gauge in the car. And so I started to see some interesting things in doing that.
What was your symptom, though? Why were you...
So the symptom, this is going way back to when I first put on that catch can on the car. I went out to the track, like I drove probably 600 or 800 miles with no issue, no real collection, and then I went out to the track, and in 3 laps I filled the thing up.
Yeah, I've had that.
And so it's like, okay, well, what happened? What did I do wrong? So there's going to be more on that later, because now I didn't put the gauge on at that point. I think I put it on when I then had a similar issue with the radium Air Oil separator.
Yeah.
And that was spoilers, but that was due to my install error, basically not putting the vacuum hose on the rearmost port on the turbine. I put it on the front where there's just minimal suction.
Sure.
And because the PC valve is deleted in that, then there was minimal suction, and so there's nothing to balance out under full boost when crankcase pressure would start to build or need more scavenging.
Yeah.
So that's what I learned with the gauge.
Yeah, and I think the natural reaction is, wow, I got a broken engine, and when you do that at the track, because you've been driving for so long with no problems, and then you're flogging the car, and then you fill it up. I actually got kicked off High Plains for that, and for just a session, and then I drained it. I thought it was broken, and then knowing that my engine was broken, I drove home. And I was so angry that I was like, well, I've never done a full, speed pull, and this was in my swapped RS. Yeah. So I did a couple pulls up to about 160 on a back road. Yeah. And I looked in my rearview mirror, there was no smoke at all. And then I pulled over and I looked in the catch can, there was no new oil. And I was like, wow, this is just like before I went to the track. And I think it was a mystery like yours, but you chose to do something about it.
Well, just trying to get data. Yeah. Data. And so when I had the gauge on the car and I'm driving around, then I could see a little glimpse of what's happening, but it's just when I'm driving and I can have an eye on the gauge. But so then that's when I realized, well, I know a guy with a dyno. Yeah. And so I made you an oil cap. Yeah. And I gave it to you, and you thought I was crazy at the time, I believe.
No, I thought it would be valuable information, and I thought I would put it on cars with cracked ring lines and show them that look how much boost your engine has inside the crankcase.
No, that was probably over a year ago at this point.
Oh yeah, that was about 2 years ago.
Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, because I had that before I had this dyno.
Okay, so a long time. Yeah. Now, so the thing that really changed was when you got this dyno. So this is the mainline dyno that has the 2 vacuum ports.
Yeah, so this dyno came with 2 map sensors, probably to do twin turbo cars, things like that. And my first idea was, hey, I'm going to be able to watch up pipe pressure and back pressure in cars. And then the practicality of that, like drilling and tapping everyone's up pipe, was really impossible, especially rotated turbos where you can't even get in there. And those are the most important ones to sort of watch back pressure as a clue to when you're done tuning. Hint, hint. Yeah. If you can think about that in another video. Yeah. But so that would have been great information. And then I said, well, what could I hook this second boost gauge to that's convenient? Like, what could be more convenient than screwing on an oil filler cap? Yep. The FA has the same thread pitch. We can watch it on both engines.
Almost every Subaru.
Yeah, and I only tuned Subarus for the most part. So just so everyone out there knows, this shop probably does. I'd say 100 Subarus to one other car. Yeah. And I think people think I do a lot more because I'm the other cars are so much more interesting often to me, and I post.
They usually have a high cool factor.
Yeah. I think like Subarus. Yeah. But anyway, this is a great data that's become invaluable to me. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
Now with this dyno, you've been able to data log that, and so that's kind of what why we're coming back here, one of the reasons is you now have a lot of experience in data logging cars, and you've been able to actually look at crankcase pressure data log it on a big swath of cars, and you've now started to notice some things, notice some patterns, notice maybe where this is a valuable tool, a valuable indicator.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that first off. So the first car that we want to talk about, and what we're going to do, we're going to talk about a couple different cars, a couple different scenarios, and where this was a valuable piece of information.
Yeah.
But so the first one came in just 100% stock.
Yeah, bone
totally
stock car. Yeah.
And then you put on
a Cobb SF engine. Yeah, and we did a stage 1 tune. I mean, at this point, this car, we have the data all the way going up to their stage 3 flex fuel kit. Yeah. But the data is particularly interesting on the first day when we did the stock intake going to the Cobb SF. So here I have the dyno, and this is the results of a stock 19 STI. This car is completely unmodified, probably about 1,200 miles on it, so just after break-in.
And this is basically like a baseline.
This is a baseline for a stock car. Okay. In fact, if you look at the record recording, it says stock stage 1 and then stage 1 SF and then stage 1 SF custom. So we went through all of these things on the dyno in one night. And the dyno, I generally don't like to change parts and try to compare numbers. But if I'm leaving the car on the dyno and not touching the straps or the tires or the gas in the tank, all these variables that usually change between when you put parts on and put the car back on the dyno, nothing changed at all except that SF. So we have some really good back-to-back data for that night and for that initial custom calibration. So without further ado, here it is. If we look at what we're looking at, just so everyone out there knows, this is horsepower and torque at the wheels. I use the dyno to calibrate RPM. I'm not using an RPM pickup, although it does that as well quite nicely. Okay. And then down here we have air-fuel ratio. This is expressed in terms of gasoline, even if I'm using a different fuel, but luckily on this, all these examples will probably be on gasoline. Okay. And then over here we have the first map sensor, which is the boost gauge. And if I move the cursor around, you'll see that these numbers populate. So it's 16 pounds or so right there. As we move along, it changes what it is. And I have this little bar coming up, but don't worry about it. But anyway, it shows you RPM and what's going on. But this is the most interesting one because this, as you can see, before we make boost, this is the crankcase. It's at 0.04 psi, positive pressure, me just sitting there at driving along. And then as we start getting into boost, you can see it draws deeper and deeper. And even as boost tapers down, it's still drawing deeper and deeper all the way to red line. I mean, you would almost think like as boost tapers, maybe it would level out or start coming back up or something like that and mirror it in reverse. But the truth is, the engine's spinning faster and faster, so the flow is going up despite the fact that the pressure...
turbo is starting to suck more and more air.
Yeah.
And so you have... At this point, under positive boost pressure, the PCV valve is closed, so the only source of that vacuum is basically the turbo.
Yeah.
The turbos pull through the turbo inlet. And so from that extent, this is kind of the predicted result, which is, okay, as the engine RPM increases and the turbo builds more boost pressure and maintains it, there's a little bit more suction, and so the crankcase goes a little bit more into vacuum.
Yes, correct. And the other thing is, I think what we want to do is we're going to cut away and show you guys sort of the components of this. So what we want to say is there are two factors going on here that we want to talk about with this pressure. One is blow-by, and you can see blow-by would be a positive pressure thing that you would see if you were measuring it. But what's countering it, and actually way more than countering it, is suction. And that suction, where does it come from? It comes from the inlet hose, the turbo inlet hose. So let's go deeper into where that suction comes from. It's created by restriction. There's the outside world here. We have a turbocharger, and then we have a restriction called the air filter. So the air filter creates this vacuum, and that's so interesting because here we are, this is stage 1, this one is stage 1 also. So just so you can see, it repeats itself over and over pretty consistently, 1.411 to 1.412, we're talking 1/100 of a pound, and actually these sensors have a little signal noise in them too, so you'll see little jumps and stuff. So this was our first off-the-shelf map, and you can see actually the suction went down even deeper right here, substantially.
So this is now the stage 1 tune.
This is
still stock everything.
Still stock airbox. In fact, it pulls a deeper vacuum because it's running higher boost.
Higher boost pressure. So increased boost pressure. Now the manifold vacuum or the crankcase vacuum just drops a little bit more.
Yeah, because the restriction of the air filter is now it's staying as restrictive as it was, but the turbo is trying to suck harder.
Right.
So that creates a deeper vacuum for the crankcase. So
then here's the question: what happens when you put on the SF intake. So if you at home and you want to pause it, think about it, think what you would expect to happen. But now, Harvey, so what happened when you put the SF intake?
Is this where the Jeopardy music is?
This is where the Jeopardy music is. Yes, you can hear it.
Anyway, yeah. So as soon as we put on, so this is still the SF, and you can see more consistency there. But this is here, and I'm going to jump all the way to the end. I'm not putting up the off-the-shelf. Oh no, these were the off-the-shelf ones, and you can see they have a little more boost. So Harvey makes even more boost because he feels pressured to beat the numbers of the off-the-shelf map. Honestly, this is probably, Mike is a great tuner. He makes the off-the-shelf maps, I believe, on this series, and they were great, and yet I felt the need to beat that a little bit, and I do it in a way that's pretty obvious. I raise the boost here. So what happens when we raise the boost is you can see it doesn't draw as much crankcase pressure at all. I don't know why it has that anomaly. That may be noise right there, but you can see it draws less pressure. Now the reason for this is we also, even though we raise the boost again, we also put on a Cobb SF intake. So the restriction in that inlet hose is now way less, and therefore we can see these two.
So let's isolate the last of the stock stage 1 maps, and then the first one with the SF intake, so we can highlight the difference between those two.
All right. So there we go. So you can see the last of the off-the-shelf
stage
1 maps is running a little less boost than me, but a deeper vacuum because it's still on the. Oh no, this isn't the stock SF maps. This is just the stock intake stage 1 map.
Right.
So it's pulling a deeper vacuum. I don't even know if I ever did anything because we were a little. It was nighttime like this, but we were short on time, so I think I did. I don't think I ever did a stage 1 SF. I think I jumped straight to custom is what I have.
Well, that's okay.
So I put the SF on and I just sort of started. I might have labeled that this was a stage 1 SF, but I do believe these are our custom maps here. And basically I raised the boost a little bit even higher to get good results.
But the result, as far as crankcase pressure goes, is consistent, which is that it drops slightly.
Yeah, the crankcase pressure did drop.
And so the explanation of that, like you've basically been alluding to,
or
is
rise.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, is
the vacuum
that
dropped.
so the Cobb SF intake does work. It does do its job. It reduces the restriction on the air getting into the engine.
Yes.
But in doing that, now there's not as much of a vacuum to pull on the crankcase pressure.
Sure. Yeah.
And like the other, like, so this is a perfect example of that, and it lets us see where this gauge kind of gives us a window into what's happening in the crankcase. But the other way to think about this, or where we know that this can be a restriction, is like people that were collapsing turbo inlets.
Sure.
You know, that is how much pressure can be present when you have a restrictive filter.
I actually had one for this. You just reminded me of it, and it pulled 5-6 pounds of suction.
Yeah, but that's how it collapses the inlet. Is if there's too much of restriction in front.
I mean, after it was closed, you can just watch it just go boom.
Yeah.
And you could almost, I almost felt like checking all the PCV hoses after that. And like, are they full of oil?
Right. Well, but so that's at least how we know that there is suction present in the turbo inlet, and this is showing one how the SF intake is effective, but then also that does have a small effect on the PCV system.
Certainly, yeah. So let's get back to the original kind of the idea that when we talk about this, we just have this reading. We don't know, like I was saying earlier, we don't know if someone has a dirty filter and no blow-by versus the guy that has a really clean filter and a lot of suction, or no, a dirty filter with a lot of suction and a lot of blow-by versus a clean filter and no blow-by. You might get the same reading here.
Possible, but I'll say, to be fair, both of these are pulling vacuum. It's just to a different degree.
And this is a known good car. This is a brand new car. So,
had like what 1,200 miles.
Yeah, 1,200 miles. So this is great data. So.
Perfect. So this is what we'll call this kind of the baseline because it's a stock car, and then with the SF intake, so kind of a stock car with a small variation, but we can kind of see what's going on.
So this helps us all, this helps us explain to you, like, hey, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the restriction of the filter, air filter, to create a vacuum for the crankcase. And that's how a normal PCV operates. Honestly, when you gave me this part and I hooked it to cars, I expected to see it flat all the time. I thought Subaru would design a system that just kept a nice flat crankcase pressure. And then when I saw this, I was like, wow, that's like a dry sump or something. And that was my first thought. But of course, I think dry sumps can pull more than a pound.
They can.
But it's pretty neat. I have seen some dry sumps. I know the ARE doesn't hook to the I've seen those with breathers on even on the heads and stuff where I'm like, oh, it doesn't seem like it's pulling a deep vacuum, or it's designed to.
So it's depends on the design, yeah, depends on the scavenge punch.
That's for another video too.
Spoiler alert, we'll have one that you can test here, hopefully in 2 months.
Nice.
So, yes.
Which one is it? Which kid is it? Oh, that's all you can say.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all right, so we're gonna jump here to the next example.
Okay. Well, welcome back to the new section. So on this section of the video, we're going to talk about a different example. So this example is an 05 Forester XT. It had a...
And this is one of the early cars that you put this on.
Yeah, this was early, I believe. Let's see, 606 is the run number. And it's really early when I got this dyno.
Yeah.
These numbers they're serialized. So this is probably the first few months. And this is someone that actually works in the industry, but I don't know, for whatever reason, he didn't have a clear understanding of PCV systems. So on the first pull, I won't even start by telling you what he did, but I'll show you what the first pull was. And you can see the first pull here, I let off rather early. This is 4900. And the reason I let off rather early is because here at Redline, if we look over here at the crankcase pressure, you can see it's 5.7 PSI. That's 5.7 pounds of pressure in the crankcase.
Which is a lot.
Insane. Like that should be seals shooting oil, the back of the cam gears.
So by this point, you had seen enough normal situations like what we looked at first to realize that this was...
Even if not, I don't think I would have kept going. I think this was an alarm bell to me. And the real reason I also let off is this thing put a white smoke cloud out the back of the shop. I thought the police were going to come, or a fire department with a hose, because this was a lot of smoke. And so I stopped and I looked under the hood and I told the guy, I said, I think your engine's blown because of this amount of blow-by.
Right.
It comes from somewhere. And at the time I was assuming he had either catch cans or venting. And guess what I did? I looked at his engine and I found vacuum caps on every PCV port on the whole engine.
So so this is someone that had completely removed the PCV system.
Yeah.
But also completely capped it.
Completely, the crankcase was sealed.
Okay.
It was complete. It was a closed vessel.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And there's blow-by. So this is blow-by that we're measuring. So as you're revving, you got to think these are all little contributions from each cylinder. From the ring wiping, and a little bit of the gas gets by. Yep. So that's the gas getting by, and it happens at a faster and faster rate as that RPM speeds up because there's more wiping per unit time. So it was a little bit of a lean pull. I think we weren't on ethanol. This was gasoline, so it's a little bit of a lean pull. I won't criticize my tune over here. Don't look at the air fuels, folks. But this was not crazy boost yet either.
And this is the first pull. This is the first pull. Like the feel, and you immediately knew something was wrong. And then you looked at the engine, you saw that.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
Oh, so I got some hoses and I made fake catch cans. We just kind of vented it. There is a PCV valve on the back of the block which he had capped off.
Yeah.
And I left it capped off so that it couldn't pull in on vacuum and it wouldn't interrupt my tune. But I didn't want crankcase pressure, so I vented everything. Knowing that one was capped off, it shouldn't become a problem with the intake, especially since the whole inlet hose was also capped off. Yeah. There was nothing to screw with the MAF or the calibration, much like an IAG race system.
Yeah,
it's completely,
something similar to that.
Yeah, it's completely divorced, except it's really not even catch cans. It's literally hoses, breather hoses, almost like with old V8s when they put breathers on the valve covers.
It basically changes the PCV to an atmospheric PCV system.
Yeah. Very, very bad for the world. Anyway, here I pulled it up right here. Lost a bit of power. I richened it up, so probably pulled out some timing too. But look at here. After doing that, you can see this is textbook correct. I can now say after that pull, I had all the confidence in this guy's engine in the world, because we don't see crankcase pressure anymore. It's flat. And another thing that we haven't talked about yet is when you have a vent to atmosphere PCV system, this is what it should look like. And you can see this does say it's 0.3 psi. Ideally it would say 0 or something like that. Here's 0.2. But we do see a little blow-by, and we see, even though it's venting, and this, I mean, if you think about it, like people are like, oh, the IAG race has this 1-inch vent, you shouldn't see anything. This had even less than that. It just had hoses, and we're just measuring on the crankcase. So you can see even the factory venting still provides some pressure against the little bit of blow-by there is.
Well, or the other way, what I would say is that the stock PCV system is employing a vacuum to offset any kind of positive pressure that's created.
Yeah.
So with an atmospheric system, you don't have that vacuum inherently to offset any positive pressure, but you're reliant on just the ability of the system to dissipate that. But if you have like like for instance, if you had an atmospheric vent that was a half-inch diameter, like a single half-inch diameter,
Yeah.
you might see a slight build in pressure because that half-inch diameter is now creating the resistance to let that pressure out. So,
Sure.
given the amount of pressure that's sneaking past the rings, whatever, that might increase the amount of pressure that you would see.
Yeah.
But so with an atmospheric vent system, and there's a train, but with the atmospheric vent system, it would not be inherently unusual to see a slight positive number.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No. In fact, I was at shout out to Brian Macy at EFI store in Lake Havasu. He has a car that he works with, and I think it's almost gifted to him. It's a Black Widow or Black Beauty or something like that. I was at his shop, and he has it's like an 800 cubic inch V8, and it has vents that are probably 3 or 4 inches off the valve covers.
Yeah.
And he had a pressure sensor in that vent hole, and I said, "What are you going to measure there? It doesn't even have anything attached to it. It had these big, almost like clear tubes going into the frame, so that if he blows the engine, all the blow-by will go into the frame and not get on the tires."
Yeah.
And I said, "How could you measure anything there? It's such a big hole." And he said, "I measure about 5 psi, but this is a 3,000 horsepower engine, probably with running methanol with loose pistons and things like that. So there's a lot of blow-by, but even so, with like a 3 or 4 inch hole on each valve cover, 5 psi at 3,000 horsepower. So we see that even vent-to-atmosphere systems, you'll get a little pressure there."
So the other interesting thing that shows, this is why there's a PCV system to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people wonder, like, as problematic is the wrong word, but we'll just say problematic as the PCV system can be, especially as you start to modify the cars. I think there's kind of a natural frustration that can come in.
Sure.
So why did they put this on here? Well, because there is going to be pressure in the crankcase, you have to do something to deal with it. If you do nothing to deal with it, then you would see a result like this. So there, you have to do something. You have to account for it somehow and manage it somehow.
Sure. Here's my other question for everybody to think about. I don't even know the answer, but does the stock system pulling a deep vacuum help enough with windage and actual air resistance to free up a little power? And if so, what is the quantity of that? And would there be a case where putting an SF intake on the car might hurt the power because you get more windage and you get more resistance of the crank? So that's a very good question.
That is a deep question that will require more testing.
Oh yeah, the kind I don't have.
I will give you my scientific answer of I don't know. Maybe,
it's a good one.
Maybe.
Let's think about it.
Yes. Very cool. Well, all right, so let's set up.
Sure. So our next example that we'd like to illuminate tonight is a 14 WRX. This is a 2014 WRX that came in. It had a air oil separator. It's a kind that I don't really like, and there's a number of reasons I don't like it. Basically, I like the fact that the reservoir. We know that isn't it right that they only drain when you let off the gas?
Right.
There's enough pressure that it's not draining until you let off, but that's when it takes a chance to return the oil. There is a design that sits on the oil filler cap, and it's made by multiple manufacturers, and it doesn't have that reservoir. It also, what I don't like about it is it
has really small ports.
Small ports, and it tees them together. And I like keeping as many ports open as you can, because venting the crankcase.
Well, like we just saw, the crankcase has to breathe out. There's going to be some amount of positive pressure, and you have to deal with it somehow.
Yeah, and so when people make devices that supposedly improve that venting, but then they tee the factory hoses into each other, it bothers the hell out of me.
It can be problematic.
It can be, but it can be okay.
But now we have a tool where we can kind of see what the result is, and so let's.
So this is the result. So this is a car with one of those little oil filler cap ones, and this car actually was smoking on the day of the tune. The exhaust smelled a little bit oily to me. I kind of had a feeling that it was a broken ringland, because that's sort of the symptom that we see. And we also see when you have a broken ringland, you have a little more crankcase pressure. So here we had it, and I was like, the average tuner, even with this tool, watching pressure, I can see 0.4 pounds there, and then it rose again, and it dropped, and it rose. So it's kind of cyclic and weird. And that's with an AOS on the car and actually hooked back to that inlet that should be pulling a vacuum. It wasn't pulling a vacuum, so I was a little disappointed for the guy, and I was a little sad.
And you had secondary signs. You were there was an oily smell from the exhaust, and there was smoke that was coming out of the tailpipe, probably at wide open throttle or after liftoff.
No, actually during wide open throttle there was some smoke. And after liftoff, both. But mainly during wide open throttle there was just enough smoke that you could see it.
And normally, I mean, that would probably be an indicator to like investigate further. Maybe do a compression leak down test.
Yeah.
See if there's any other cause for a big increase in crankcase pressure.
Yeah, yeah. But I try to give people hope. So this guy, I
Right.
said to him, I said, hey, you know, this might just be your this AOS. This could just be the AOS. You should try a better AOS. And I suggested he get the IAG race system, which he did. And then when he came back with the IAG race,
So this was not on the dyno. This was
off the dyno. So these numbers are incomparable as far as horsepower and stuff in my mind.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So it was
yeah.
days later, weeks later.
Months later.
Months later.
So
Okay.
it took him a while to save up, get the IAG AOS, and then
Okay.
when he got it on and brought it back, look at this. This was one of the pulls during the next session. You can see it's higher boost though, but I felt better about pushing it. And you can see now it pulls a nice vacuum, about 0.3 pounds. That's a full half pound, a little over a half pound different from what it was doing before. But it is now in a vacuum. It didn't smell oily at all. The car made more power this day. And here we have
more smoke or oily smell.
no smoke, no oily smell. So we can see that when it's working correctly, it helps keep oil out of your exhaust as well.
Right.
Which is great. I think honestly, part of it isn't just the fact that the blow-by is happening. I think when you have pressure in your crankcase, the wiping of the ring can be wrong, and it can push oil back into the cylinder through the ring.
It can. Well,
Yeah.
and I can also say that from personal experience, if the pressure gets high enough, it can actually prevent the turbo from draining.
Uh-huh.
So if the crankcase pressure is starting to interfere with the turbo draining back to the oiling system, then the oil has to go out somewhere because it's coming in under pressure, and so it can go out through either compressor or
seal.
the turbine.
Yeah, I've seen it go out the turbine seal a lot in my
Yeah.
experience.
Yes. Yes.
It
Yes.
seems to be the place it likes to go. So this one, here we have it, a perfect example of crankcase pressure with two different actual AOSs, the one on the filler cap without enough hoses, and then the one with all the factory hoses connected to all the right places, pulling a nice deep vacuum and solving a problem that looked just like a broken ringland. So
Right.
we really want to
But
say that
it was a symptom that was actually of the PCV system or an improperly functioning PCV
it was not a
system.
broken engine, which
Right.
I'm so pleased to report. So those of you out there that think you have a broken engine and smell oil, and if you have one of those, you might try even just removing it and going back to stock for a moment
Yeah.
and seeing, or hooking a vacuum gauge to it somehow. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, at this point, I will say this is simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you take a plastic oil cap and you just put a barb fitting in it, which a couple dollars, and then just run it. Really, a boost gauge is a perfect gauge to run into if you can find any boost gauge, because it will show vacuum and positive pressure.
Yeah.
You don't need just a positive gauge; it has to be able to show both.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're having those symptoms, this is simple enough that this might be something that you want to actually try and see for yourself.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, we got one more example.
We do, yes.
So let's set that one up.
Oh, okay, sounds great.
All right. So Harvey, for the last example,
Yeah.
what is the scenario as we're starting to log here?
Well, I'll say, I mean, the thing that this little piece of inexpensive tool that you made, the fact that it works so well means that it has to do something for us. And on the dyno, what the thing that it can do is, unfortunately, it can tell us when it's time to stop and instantly. And we saw that with Dakota's car. One pull, we saw all this pressure, and it was like, oh wow. So if you ever want to see a dyno tuner cry, you can replicate this event or this series of events.
Right.
Luckily, I was completely absolved of guilt or fault. This was just the other day, and it's still fresh, and it still hurts, and I am too empathetic to be a dyno tuner. So
Well, and so to speak a word to that before we show what happened. So what this piece of information is giving you as you're data logging it is again, it's another basically look into what the engine is going through, and really it's kind of a measure of PCV health, but also engine health.
yeah.
So it's one of those, an indicator, kind of like a knock light. A knock sensor or knock light is supposed to tell you, okay, well, something is going wrong with the engine. To an extent, this is another piece of information that can indicate something similar. And we've seen that already to this point. But so in this scenario, you were tuning a car where something went wrong.
Yeah.
But this was the indicator, that one of the indicators that told you something went wrong. But this was kind of the test that once you kind of came back to do another pull on the car, you could see like, okay, well, how wrong did it go?
Sure, exactly. Yeah, and the other thing I think is that slightly hurt engines can make all the power that a perfect engine can make.
Especially a turbocharged car.
Yeah, a turbocharged car.
Broken ring lands, like the forced induction, shoved in the air and under pressure, more than atmospheric pressure. It really masks how bad the damage can be, possibly for a period of time.
Quite a long time. I know I had a broken ring line for over a year on my original. Before I did my first hybrid, I think you remember that. You saw me racing with nitrous in that car. Yep. So I broke pistons, and I knew it would misfire at idle, and I knew something was funny, but it took about a year before it just finally did the big let go. But yeah, it's nicer to know the moment it happens, and I think on the dyno that is some good data. So anyway.
Well, and for you as a tuner, just like you said, you had been data logging it, so you could see that everything was fine until it wasn't.
Yeah.
And that you were able to find what the problem was.
Oh, sure. Instantly.
And knowing that was not something that you had touched, then you knew, okay, well, this isn't anything that I did. This isn't anything tuning related. This is a mechanical problem that manifested.
Yes.
As you were tuning the car.
Yeah, and it really was something as simple as a hose popping apart. Basically, this customer bought a forged engine. It was a pretty nice engine. And it does have strange anomalous readings. It always did. So these are previous tunes.
So let's set up just the car and the turbo and the engine.
Yeah, the car. It was a nice 08 STI. It had a Blausch turbo on it originally. The customer thought it was failing, so he put on a new turbo, and he chose a Blausch Dom 5, which is a
big turbo,
a very large turbo for like a stock head studs, stock head gaskets car. And the car, it performed decently. The first time I had it had the interesting thing is it had an intercooler that all the fins were crushed shut. It's like someone had taken it to the car wash and sprayed the stock intercooler until all the fins were bent. Wow. And so we ran into knock at only 20 pounds on that first tune, and he only wanted to tune on 91 octane gasoline. So with the stock top mount, with all the fins bent shut, I showed him with a thermal camera touching the intercooler how hot it was getting and why we couldn't go past about 20 pounds the first time he was here. He left a little disappointed, put on a new intercooler, and decided at the same time to do the Dom 5.
Gotcha.
The engine wasn't, I don't think, built enough for a Dom 5, and he's running low octane 91 fuel, so we really didn't want to push too hard. Still on a top mount, but a brand new 08 plus STI top mount.
And just relevant to our previous conversations, PCB system in this case was?
It was stock, and this car had anomalous, but it is a built engine. Some built engines have a bit more blow-by, so it was consistent. We saw this consistent.
And that's because built engines, looser tolerances.
Yeah.
Typically looser piston wall tolerances, typically looser ring gaps.
Sure.
To accommodate higher power, higher heat.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but all that can lead to more pressure in the crankcase.
It can, yeah, and that's what we see here. And even though this had a stock PCB style system hooked up and running correctly, we always saw this. So this was, let's see, these were 2 different days, in fact, here. So we have these 3 pulls on 2 different days, and we have this consistent. This yellow pull is actually when it came back with the new different turbo. So again, this is 4900s, and then this is 6200s. So this yellow one was our first pull of the day, or maybe our second one, something like that. Anyway, it was a good pull. I have a data log here showing no knock or anything like that. I'll pull it up really quick just to show you so that I can pull up the next one. And here we have the timing data. It actually did pull a degree, maybe two degrees towards red line on this pull. So I was a little bit, I don't know, I was a little bit like, wow, maybe I'm tuning a little too hot. But the truth is this was only at 15 degrees at red line, so I was kind of like, that's strange. Anyway, let me show you what happened on the very next pull. I'll pull up the log for it first, because it was the log. You might see something here. So this bottom line is our individual knock sum for cylinders, and then this green line is boost here. You can see this is really just the boost alone down here. It jumped up in boost even though our wastegate duty cycle was dropping. Well, the reason for that was this was an external wastegate that he had converted to, and it was only using the bottom port and the in through 3, out through 2 method that Cobb and everyone else tells you to use.
So an external gate with just a single vacuum hose going to it.
Yeah, single vacuum hose, and when that vacuum hose had been made from 2 hoses, no zip ties, straight wall joiner, and that popped apart at 20 pounds. In the middle of a pull. That hose was not visible to anybody in the room. It was hiding under the manifold, intake manifold is the way it had been routed. And when that came apart, this car hit, according to this log, it was 34 pounds of boost. Here we have it on the dyno, and I was logging here too. Also agreeing 34.5 pounds of boost on both the log and that.
And before the vacuum issue, it was running, what, about 19, 20 pounds of boost?
Yeah, about 19 pounds of boost is where we were tuning. So, okay. That's, geez, almost doubling the boost.
Almost double, yeah.
And on 91.
So obviously this external gate, this was the way that it was plumbed, it was a fail closed. So basically, at that point, the turbo's kind of made whatever boost it can make.
Yeah, the turbo just ran away with itself, and here's the result. So a Dom 5 can make 34 pounds, folks.
Pretty quickly, too.
Put it on a mild engine.
Yeah.
So I'll say we see the car ran out of injector here. It was running 850 cc's. It went up to about 12 to 1. But the scary thing is, to me, is if those of you who monitor Ignition Advance know, I was running, we like you saw on the pull before, we were running about 15, 16 degrees towards redline. This was running, at that moment, 3 degrees after it pulled out the other 9.8.
So the ECU saw the issue and it immediately started to pull timing. It also tried to drop the wastegate duty.
Yeah, it tried to lower boost.
But obviously there's no connection there, so now it can't.
Yeah, it couldn't lower the boost. It could pull the timing, but it wasn't enough. I mean, 10 degrees is usually plenty, but it wasn't enough in this case. So what happened is, I believe it must have hurt a piston or a ring somehow, because here is the telltale. We see here on that pull, this hits 1.07 psi, and that's very anomalous for this car. Even though this car was a strange car that had crankcase pressure, it was at least consistent all the time until this happened. So I decided to do a final pull.
And just to set, so you saw the boost spike, but you also saw the crankcase pressure spike, and you saw all of the telemetry, so you knew something had happened.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's where you started to diagnose.
Found
the hose.
Yeah, we got out, diagnosed, found the hose. I put a bunch of extra zip ties on it, and actually, what's interesting is it had a zip tied coil pack. Subaru owners are familiar with that.
Yeah.
And that had fallen off at the same time, so I was like, "Oh my gosh, cylinder 2's dead. I think it might be hurt." And then I pulled out the battery and pulled out the coil pack, and saw that the zip tie had failed. And I was like, and I plugged it in, put it back on, and it ran again smooth as day.
Right.
And I was like, look, it's not, we didn't hurt anything, everything is fine. And then I did another pull, and that's my final pull right here. And you can see, let's look at the timing on this one. This one's clean as hell. It's a great pull, nothing bad happened. And if I pull it up here, and I'm going to stand in front of the crankcase pressure, so we pull it up over here, and you can see it makes, it's the white line here, and this was the one before in yellow, so let me get rid of all these sad pulls and previous pulls. And we can see that these are the ones before and after. It took a while to diagnose, so this is some lost enthalpy. It doesn't spool as quick when it's cold. But it finally caught up, and it actually exceeded the previous pull. No knock at all. Same exact boost. Everything's fine, right, folks? Well, no. On this final pull, you can see this was the one before it. This was the final pull. It made over a pound again. And so at that point, we actually removed your tool and sat in neutral, and I revved it, and everything looked great until we hit about 3,000 RPMs. From 3,000 up, a steady stream of smoke began coming out of the crankcase. So I said, hey, what should we do? And I said, I could keep tuning it, but I know your engine is hurt at this point from this data. And I had to explain it a few times, almost like making this video.
Right.
We had to explain what we see here, and then he smartly decided, he said, no, I think we're done today, and he was very sad. Luckily, he was with his woman, and she really was understanding of the situation.
Which is fortunate.
Yes, and so he's they don't hate me because I wasn't at fault, and I'll actually, you guys, you might see the video, we may have the picture of the hose or something, but so this is really sad, but the good thing is, if I didn't have this data, if this was not here, I could get rid of it, I could be not watching it.
If you were not seeing what was going on in the crankcase.
Yeah, I would just be like, let's keep tuning.
Everything was fine. You dodged a bullet.
Yeah, and we don't want that. Even if it hurts our reputation, we want to be honest with all our customers and say, even if they don't understand and they want to blame us, honestly, the coolest thing about this dyno, and you guys are going to see it in the video because I'm sending you lots of these screenshots, is rather than the standard AFR and boost readings, I put when this type of stuff happens, or when people don't make the power they want for a good reason, whether it's fuel pressure, which I also can monitor on this dyno, I actually produce a dyno sheet with the relevant data as to why, because then when the person puts it up on a forum or on Facebook these days, and people are like, that's not enough for that turbo, that person can say, well, I have too much crankcase pressure, or I have no fuel pressure. So by gathering other pieces of data that a lot of tune shops don't gather, you have insights into when you should stop.
Well, and the other significance here is because you saw the crankcase pressure increase from the run where you had the failure to when it was fixed and everything else looked fine, but the crankcase pressure went up.
Yeah.
And so that was an indicator that there's a failure here.
And there wasn't even smoke on this one that was visible out of the tailpipe on that last one. Sorry, folks, I'm getting ready to cry again. Or that was lunch. I don't know.
The thing with the failure is that when it's a spectacular failure, I mean, there's so much fallout. There's so many other collateral damage that happens with a spectacular failure. So stopping where you stopped, I mean, it's something where this car might live, like if it was a broken Ringland, say, I mean, it might live to drive normally for a period of time, knowing that there's an issue, knowing that you have to take care of it. Or if you stop right now, you disassemble it, maybe it is just a broken Ringland, it's a set of pistons that bore the cylinder again.
Yeah.
And put it back together, and the fallout is going to be much less.
Yeah. When you leave these problems alone and drive it like nothing happened, or when you don't know a problem happened and drive it.
You don't see the problem.
Yeah.
You keep tuning it, think everything's fine, and then that's when you get basically a skylight installed in the block, and and that requires attention, and usually a lot of attention.
Yeah. So that's it. That's all the insight we have on this stuff. But it's
a cool piece of data.
I
think
invaluable.
That what I can say, I'll bring it back just to my personal experience. Having a gauge in the car that shows this all the time, like it was something where on the track, and more on this later, but at the track I could see that something was off. So when I went back with an Air Oil Separator install, similar to this, the car was basically driving okay, seemed to be making power fine, but I could see that the number, I was building positive pressure and it shouldn't have been. And so that was an indicator to me also, like I could have kept driving that day, and it might be something where I would have just had excessive oil consumption. All right, I have to add a quart or two at the track, which is not in and of itself that unusual, but I knew that there was a secondary something going on that I had to diagnose, and so I stopped.
And so for you, was it just routing and PCB issues?
Yep.
No broken engine.
So spoiler, I'm going to go into this in another video, but it was I had misread the directions to install the Air Oil Separator, and I had plumbed it to the front port on the turbo instead of the back port. The front port, which is close to the bend, there's very minimal vacuum there.
Sure.
The back port right in front of the turbo, there's a lot more vacuum there.
Sure, yeah.
So with the Radium AOS, you delete the PCV. So the only source of scavenging is the pull from the turbo, but I had basically deleted that by putting it into the wrong port, and so I saw it going positive.
Sure, yeah.
And so again, saw the issue at the track. On the street, never saw an issue.
Yeah.
But on the track, long duration of full throttle pulls, I saw the issue, and so I stopped and I fixed it, and now, knock wood, it seems to be fine. But it was a long process to get there. So it's basically analyzing the data without being able to data log and do all of this. It was just trying to figure out what was going on.
Sure,
and what I had done, and
once you got it right, you saw the vacuum.
Retracing my steps, honestly. Like when nothing else made sense, is retracing my steps and going back to the directions and realizing, I did this wrong. And and so then saw basically a normal behavior. And realized, okay, kind of like one of the previous examples, it was not a failed engine. It was actually improper routing of the PCV, which, as we now know here and from my personal experience, can cause all kinds of weird problems.
Sure, yeah.
So,
awesome. I love it.
So it's just it's a cool piece of data, and it's as simple as a boost gauge to install.
What about this one? I have anotght thought. This has something. It's related, but mildly. And you guys are both high plains drivers with some experience. I thought maybe that my catch can filled up because there are a lot of left-turning sweepers that climb hills there, and there's an AOS in the back of the engine from the factory. And I almost felt like taking left sweepers while pointed uphill would push oil that way. And that's where the little breather vent is on the block. Do you think there's anything to left-handed uphill sweepers encouraging more oil to go through that PCV sort of AOS that's on the back of the block?
Well, so the first thing I will say is, from my experience having a gauge. So I mean, I've not driven the car very much in the last 2 years, but I've driven it a decent amount with the gauge on it to see behavior. So the one thing that I know is that to get readings like this, you pretty much have to be on a dyno and doing sustained full throttle pulls, or on a racetrack doing full throttle pulls. And I think the reason for that is and we might have to come back and do a test for this, but I think that the faster you let the car ramp up to the point where you shift, any positive pressure builds up slowly. And so it builds up a little bit, and then by the time that happens, you're shifting, the PCV is open or whatever, you're dissipating that pressure, and then you're trying to build up the pressure again. But when you're on a track and you're holding wide open throttle for like a 5 count or a 10 count or something like that.
So any climbing hill would be longer too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That's when you're going to get a PCV system. That's when you're going to stress the PCV system for sure. Now, as far as the cornering, there's a lot of theories about that. As far as the left-hand turns, or really with the boxer engine, any turn.
Sure. Because
what you can have is oil pooling up in the cylinder heads. And I've mentioned this to a reasonable degree in the dry sump video that we did. But there's a really small breather port in the valve covers. And so it would not take a whole lot of oil or a whole lot of slushing to cover that and then block one of those ports. And at that point, then that can reduce the engine's ability to breathe. On the 2.5 liter cars and some of the later JDM 2 liter cars, that's why they included that second breather on the valve covers.
It's almost like a balance tube.
It's exactly a balance tube. It's to balance the pressure between the crankcase and both valve covers, so that if you do have one of them that is blocked off, that the pressure is basically balanced between the other two, and so you're not going to continue just creating pressure over there. So in theory less, but I think on track with high duration, like at high planes, the long sweepers going uphill at wide open throttle, and then the sloshing, I mean, that's really going to put a stress on the oiling system and on the PCV system.
Sure.
So even if you have something that's off, or like marginally off, or even largely off, like what I had with my car, in both cases with the catch can and the air oil separator, my plumbing was problematic. But on the street, I never saw it. I would do, I could roll onto the throttle and stand the throttle for what was reasonable on a road, and never saw an issue.
Yeah, because I never had issues in straight lines.
Yep.
I felt like it was, and I didn't do a lot of hard pulls in straight lines. Yeah. And I didn't drag race that car, but like I said, when I left the track, I did multiple pulls in straight lines, and then I never filled that catch can again. Yeah.
What would be interesting is to figure out a way to data log this on track. Because I really think that you kind of see it here a little bit, but you're coming in and you're starting the data log when you're at wide open throttle. I think on track you can see it builds up. It takes a beat or two to build up, and then once you get to that point, that's when you're stressing the PCV system, and that's when the fault can occur. The oil consumption can occur. What have
Yeah, so that's the way it works here on the dyno, is we preload the car at wide open throttle and wait till it's kind of pre-builds boost, and then we let it rip. And that way we can get the quickest spool up, the biggest reading of the biggest range of power the car engine can make. We want to envelope everything it can do.
And I guess down to that point, all of this has shown why this is a really handy tool for a tuner to have and to have on the dyno. But I would say, from my personal experience, having that gauge on the street is also valuable.
Oh, interesting.
It can, well, I should say on the track. On the street, it really doesn't do much moving, if any.
Oh yeah, because
on
you're
a track,
so much. Yeah.
Like, you can see what the difference is. At least at this point, without having a data log like this, I can definitely say that where you see the needle start to do things and move is on track in long duration, wide open throttle.
Yeah, if I had an open road car or a half-mile car, I think I would have to have this as a
the realization. It would be real interesting what that crankcase is like halfway down, 3/4 of the way down the track before you would left off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or think about like in Nevada, one of those like 100-mile open road races.
It puts a whole different set of stresses on the PCV system, which can cause all these weird symptoms that we've basically talked about here today. But if you're not aware of what's going on in the crankcase, there's a lot of other failures that the symptoms are very similar to.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And so it would.
And especially a common one like ringland failure. It acts just like ringland failure when you have too much crankcase pressure. Yeah.
So, like smoke out the tailpipe,
oily smells,
and for me, basically the symptom that made me stop at the track that day was one, it was seeing the positive pressure on track, but it was two, because the turbo wasn't draining, I was seeing smoke out of the tailpipe on startup. So went out, did the first session, everything's fine. When I went out for the second session, the guys noticed, hey, there's a lot of smoke coming out of your car when you start it up, but on track it was totally fine.
Oh, wow.
So on track it was not smoking, but it was in the pits. And then so after the second session, when I started it up, sure enough, the smoke came out, and that's when the day's done. But I can say now that I've fixed the issue.
Yeah, so I mean, even think about like the cost of going to an expensive racetrack, the wind that gets taken out of your sails for those few days or weeks as you're diagnosing it. You think that, because we all assume the worst. Whenever we see this type of thing, we're all like, oh, I need a new engine. No.
Well, and that is the interesting thing. That is the interesting window that this gives, is that there's a lot of symptoms of issues with the PCV system that are also the same as much more significant issues with the engine. Yeah. And ringland failures, etc., will cause the same symptoms. You'd probably see similar, as we've seen, you see similar results as far as crankcase pressure goes.
And we can also say that if you are getting oil in your cylinders because you have too much pressure, that's always gonna, it can create lower octane conditions. So
it makes you more prone to knock.
Even though it's not, even though it acts like a bad problem, it can also lead to the bad problem.
It can very quickly cause it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something also to keep in mind.
But it's just. If you're going to try and stay optimistic, trying to stay optimistic is always good, seeing what this does, I mean, this is where you want to start. It's simple enough. Yeah. Find out what's going on in the crankcase, because then you can diagnose it. And in so many of these cases that we talked about today, it wasn't a catastrophic failure. It wasn't a critical failure. And even in the one that was a critical failure, the damage when you were able to diagnose it is going to be significantly less than
if I kept going for the rest of the day,
or
if I sent him on his way and said, "Hey, you're fine," and then the next person that looks at the car is like, "Hey, did you know that this thing is now smoking since you were at this shop?" Right. If you don't know that it happened here at that moment, it might look like it didn't happen at that moment. It might look like it happened on these nice poles with no knock. The person could go away and say, "Hey, that guy, he didn't mention it, and then my friend found that there was a broken ringland." Right. So we want to not absolve ourselves. We want to take responsibility for everything, but we also want to be highly aware of what we are and aren't responsible for in this field.
Be aware of what happened. Like if there was a failure, this is such a helpful tool to really be able to put your finger on when it happened and what happened and to what degree. Sure. You really have a real indicator, a really healthy indicator, especially with all the other tools that you have that you're monitoring at the shop when you're doing it to them. Yeah. To really see when something anomalous occurs, and then when that happened, and you can really diagnose it more effectively.
Oh yeah.
And similarly on the street, I would say, again, once you know what is normal, what the baseline is, you can see when something is wrong. You can see, okay, well now I'm seeing this behavior that I've not seen before. I've driven around with this for a long time, and now this is happening, and that's a big, big flag to go in and check everything out, try and find what the problem is before it's something catastrophic.
Yeah, before it gets worse. And I think that's always that's sort of the whole reason we have all of this. But the more little pieces we add with data, even when we're not watching it, and that we can go back and review, the better time we have, and the more that your experience and your wisdom starts to play into it, where you're like. I mean, honestly, like the first thing after that is I was headed for your gauge. The very first thing after that boost ran away was me looking at this and saying, "Uh-oh." Yeah. Before I looked at the knock, I didn't even, because I saw the knock actually on the screen, and that's why I let off. But I looked instantly at that, and I was like, "Oh man, that doesn't look good." But at 1 pound, it didn't look like. I mean, at 34 pounds of boost, 1 pound of crankcase pressure, that might even be normal.
Right.
On a built engine.
Yeah.
Especially one that already had some pressure, a light amount of pressure.
Right.
But I could see it was anomalous, and that's really the thing, is you see anomalous data. I mean, I'm a very graph-driven person. These, this is actually a cob log where you guys typically look at as a grid of numbers. I'm a great tuner, but I can't be if I have to do that. I have to look at things in a graph or a visual form or in some sort of model in my head. I can't do numbers the way other people can, but I take numbers and I turn them into visual, and then I can work with it.
Well, it shows you something. It's a window.
Oh yeah, and it's so much easier to see an anomaly when you're not looking at a bunch of numbers, because these really are numbers that we're looking at here. And that anomaly, if you're looking at it in a grid with thousands of them, you might be like, I don't see anything there, You're just looking past them and they're scrolling through your head. When you see a graph and something pops out at you, it's obvious and it's great. Yeah.
That's why graphs are cool.
Yeah.
And that's why data's cool.
Yeah, data's cool.
And it turns out looking at crankcase pressure, also kind of cool.
Kind of cool, very cool.
Yeah. So hopefully as we're wrapping this up, hopefully that's interesting. Hopefully maybe you can go out there and explore it yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been so interesting working with you, Harvey, and thanks for having an open mind and being willing to indulge me and just see what it is, see what you can learn from it, and doing all the data logging to really take it from what I was curious about and really push it way beyond what.
Because on the last dyno, this was actually something that I would switch. I only had one map sensor, and when you gave it to me, I would use it on some cars, but it was mainly after we knew something was wrong. It would be like, hey, let me show you what's wrong.
Because it was boost pressure or this. Yeah. And boost pressure is more important.
Yeah, boost pressure is more important for sure. But only for calibration.
That's right.
Not diagnosis.
Well, that's awesome. So go out there, check your crankcase pressure, and as always, stay tuned with Flat Iron's Tune. And follow Harvey at the Boostcreep.
Yeah.
So
me.
Yes. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.
See you guys.
Thanks, Harvey.
You're welcome. Thank you.